Well, the last year has been incredibly important in showing us the potential that the internet has to be used as a tool by the people to organize, to spread information, in certain cases like Tunisia or Egypt, to help fuel revolutions. But it's also highlighted the downsides, how governments can stifle, control all these things through censorship, how, when they're given the opportunity, many of those show no restraint. And there's also a third element that comes into play in our world today, and that's the role of private corporations. The tech giants like Google, Twitter, Facebook, as well as other companies that create censoring and monitoring technologies that they sell to the governments. So it ends up being this complex web of interest, power dynamics that highlight a fundamental problem that people around the world need to recognize, that the internet is a human creation, that it's not going to remain free and flowing and democratic unless we actually fight for it. Our guest tonight has written a book looking into how technology should be structured and governed to support the rights and the liberties of all the world's internet users. So here to discuss with me is Rebecca McKinnon, Senior Fellow at the New America Foundation and author of her newly released book, Consent of the Networked, The Worldwide Struggle for Internet Freedom. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me on.
First, just tell me, why it is that you decided to write this book. Did you have some kind of a revelation and realize that there's something that we all take for granted when it comes to the internet?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true, that I was noticing that activists, policymakers, and people in internet companies sometimes just make this assumption that the internet is kind of like freedom juice. If you just have enough of it, if you have enough of this technology, somehow democracy is going to spread and people are going to be freed. And it's not the case. It's not that simple. And I actually spent 9 years working in China as a journalist, and I've been following what's been going on with the internet in China. And I was really initially inspired to write the book because I've seen how authoritarian regimes adapt to the internet and manage to survive, and also co-opt the private sector into doing a lot of their surveillance and censorship work for them. And while China's kind of the extreme, you're seeing censorship actually spreading around the world in a lot of democracies as well. And you're seeing surveillance, and particularly unaccountable electronic surveillance, growing in ways that are very troubling. In addition to Western companies, like you said, selling censorship and surveillance technology to authoritarian regimes.
Well, so in that sense, who's the biggest villain in this scenario? Is it the companies that actually could say no, right, that might have more power over governments, or is it the governments that always want to have more power over the people? I mean, can we even really expect these private corporations to have any type of a moral compass?
Well, it does vary from country to country in terms of who's the biggest villain, but where you see the worst of the worst happening, it's when you have unaccountable government combined with unaccountable corporations basically doing what they want, and it turns basically private networks that citizens depend on for all aspects of their lives these days into an extension of state power, and the corporations are sort of doing that. But as you said, do companies have any responsibility here? I think they do, just as we've seen that companies have come to recognize, through movements over decades, that they have responsibilities towards our environment and to ensure that we have a sustainable planet to live on.
They're not fast enough.
They're not fast enough.
Well, let me bring up two
two
specific examples for you too, because and a lot of these companies are based here in the United States too, right? If we want to talk about Google, for example, currently the Justice Department is trying to argue that everything that goes on in the relationship between Google and the NSA should be kept secret. At the same time, you have Twitter that recently changed their policy to where censorship will apply not across the board on Twitter, but on a country-by-country basis. And so in situations like that, do you think that the companies are giving in? Should Google say, no, we're not going to submit to this secrecy? Do they not have a choice? Is Twitter submitting?
Yeah, well, I think we need, as voters, to also be demanding government responsible behavior, and we need to be demanding that companies be transparent and responsible. And so in the case of Google, one of the things that they have done that has been actually useful is that they release something called the Transparency Report, where they actually publish on a country-by-country basis the demands they've been getting from governments for user information. and the percentage that they've actually replied to, complied with. And so they're at least trying to be a little bit transparent about how their relationship with governments work. But with this particular case, that is troubling. And this is the problem, that our laws actually make it hard for companies to be transparent, even if they want to. Because oftentimes, with the national security letters and the gag orders, the companies can't inform the users about what's going on, how they're working with the government. And then the government itself is being opaque. And so we need to demand that the laws actually work in the favor of transparency rather than preventing companies from informing us about what's going on.
So well, the next step then, though, is getting people to be interested, right?
Exactly.
Getting people to demand this. And you make a really interesting point, too, that, the future in this sense is going to look a lot less like 1984 and a lot more like Brave New World, where we're basically just going to submit because, because of security or because of entertainment and these things that seem so attractive to us that, fine, will become some type of submissive population. And so how do you fight against that? You also mentioned that a lot of the times people will be willing to stand up for something that has entertainment value for them, that might be fun, like our SOPA and PIPA,
well,
that
that
example?
was definitely an example where people were worried that their ability to share cat and baby pictures was going to be affected by this law, in addition to their ability to organize and conduct dissent and so on. But, the old adage goes, in a democracy, you get the government you deserve. Well, we're going to get the internet we deserve. And the way it works in a physical nation or community is that whoever's most active in shaping that community or nation, to their interest, is going to get the outcome they want. And so people have to be active and act like, we're not just users of this technology. This is a space on which our public discourse depends, on which our ability to conduct dissent and organize depends. And so we need to fight to make sure that the internet evolves in a way that's compatible with our ability to use it politically and defend our political rights, because you can't assume that the internet is necessarily going to evolve in that way. And companies are making a lot of decisions about their features and their services that work in their business interest, but make it harder for us to protect our privacy, make surveillance easier, and so on. And that's very troubling.
So assume nothing, basically, because there are a lot of different elements here that are all fighting for control. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you
and very
much.
interesting book as well.
Thanks so much.